This one might be a little bit shorter in length, I think. So it's really fairly succinct, small little areas that I want to talk on. Okay, so the lecture is, as I said, 3 areas: flight, circulation and respiration. And we've already mentioned the fact that flight has been really important to insects in terms of the diversity of insects and the sheer number of insects that we see. One of the probable reasons they've done so well. This is a great photo of a weevil, Banks's Botany Bay weevil, in flight, which is found in Sydney. Some acacia plant here. And this one actually, you can see here how the front pair of wings is lifted up and the male behind. So this is the first species of insect that was collected by Joseph Banks back in 1788 when he arrived at Botany Bay with the Endeavour. So it's got quite a long history with European settlement. Okay, so in terms of flight, we're going to look at gliding, we're going to look at how we power flight and how we control our wings. We could look at circulatory systems by comparing them to us and overview them, and respiratory systems similarly by comparison, and looking at particularly the issue that aquatic insects have for getting oxygen when they are largely living underwater. Okay, back to Australian species again. This one is a species of Australian dragonfly. Now, it's quite hard to get true flight speed relative to ground. With some of the measures that we try and get of insects, but this one is clocked at around the fastest, and if you look at the Guinness Book of Records, it holds it in the Guinness Book of Records at about 58 kilometres an hour as a speed that this dragonfly can fly at. So really fast through flying, so you can get around a fair bit. We'd like to take a look at another species here, which is on that Lecking site that I showed you in Arizona from tarantula hawk wasps. These guys always used to come there as well. These are deer nasal botflies. Their name is as gross as their behaviour, so they actually stick their eggs upside the nasal cavity of deer and develop inside the nasal cavity of deer. But these guys are really impressive too. They've been clocked at around 30-40 kilometres an hour and covering distances up to 150 kilometres in their movement and terrain, probably looking for deer. But then we get, when we get to the lecture on life history systems, we get insects doing long distance migrations where we're talking thousands of kilometres with the advent of wings. So quite a few options here with wings. Okay, the first sort of flight, which is a very basic flight, this is undertaken particularly by dragonflies and locusts and grasshoppers, but all insects do some level of gliding, is gliding here. Okay, so here is a dragonfly in gliding. When you start to pursue these, you'll know that they're pretty fast and they're pretty good at evading you. But gliding flight, okay. Let's have a look at gliding as a means of getting there. So when you're trying to fly, you've got to overcome gravity and you've got to overcome resistance from drag, if you like, when you're flying. So what they do in gliding, with the case of insects, is that they change their attack angle of their wing, so they're moving their wing like this, and that helps with gliding and how well you can glide. In fact, you can change your attack. If you're with an aeroplane, your attack angle of your wing can only reach about 20 degrees before you stall, but with insects they can reach 30 to 40 degrees before that sort of activity will come. And why would that be? Well, there's 2 reasons that will be. So one is that the wings themselves are quite flexible, so they're not a fixed thing like they are on an aeroplane, and they also have aerodynamic enhancement and reduced drag by the orientation and position of small hairs on the wings, so that you can actually reduce the drag through that. So as I said, most insects glide a little, but things like dragonflies and locusts glide quite extensively, and probably more energy saving to be able to do that, which is important with locusts that swarm for very long, that may swarm and travel very long distances. Okay, so that's simple gliding. I don't think I need to add too much more to gliding. Now let's look at the number of wing beats per second, which is your frequency or hertz that different insects beat their wings at. Okay, we've got basically maybe 3, but definitely 2 groupings. We've got stuff here like dragonflies, cockroaches, locusts and grasshoppers, lacewings, caddisflies, all at a fairly low wing beat frequency, so we're talking less than 50 beats per second. Okay. But then when we're coming down here, butterflies are getting more, and then we're coming down here, some of the bugs are, but the true champions of wing beat frequencies are in the wasps and particularly in the flies. And we'll discuss why that will be in a while. But there is a shift here where we've got wing beat frequency sort of above about 100 hertz. Then we're shifting to asynchronous flight muscles rather than synchronous. Now what do I mean by synchronous and asynchronous? With an asynchronous, any muscle contraction, or the muscle contracts more than once per nerve impulse, whereas here a nerve impulse produces one muscle contraction. So here we've got a nerve impulse producing multiple muscle contractions. So you're getting very, very high frequencies of beats per second of flies. So if you want to look at that, well, here we have some flies, and I tried to write down somewhere. I think, yeah, with some of them small flies like midges, their actual wing beat frequencies, you can see it goes out here, can be up to about 1,000 beats per second. So enormously, that's where you can hear the buzz of those wings moving. And if you're a vertebrate person, you like birds, well, you'd think hummingbirds, but hummingbirds' wing beat frequency is only about 50 per second, so they're way up above that than hummingbirds. We want to look at efficiency. If we look at a bumblebee, for instance, the bumblebee's wing beat frequency is probably around 200 or so beats per second. And if you look at the fueled on nectar and you look at that as the efficiency of an engine that produces compared to say a plane engine or a car engine, that is equivalent to around 2 million kilometres per litre of nectar, okay? Whereas a car efficiency is only about 100 kilometres a litre. So they've got it pretty well worked out in terms of efficiency and design for flight. And as I said in the first lecture, they haven't sacrificed a pair of limbs to produce flight. They've actually produced their own wings. So pretty impressive figures for insects.
Is that being factored into the scale and the size?
What do you mean by the factored into the scale?
Well,
because
you
of that size. No, haven't put that through by size, but that would be efficiency. Still is that efficiency for that insect.
But the car's a lot more massive.
Yeah. It's carrying more weight. Yeah. If it was that weight, would it be that efficient as a car? Yeah, but that's a very hypothetical, I guess, in that case, isn't it? Okay, so let's have a look at when they are beating their wings, what are they doing? And one of the common myths that still is out there that a bumblebee shouldn't be able to fly. Okay? That was taken from the concept of people who work with planes, I guess, who just thought a bumblebee does this. Okay? Nothing particularly exciting. What they don't realise, hadn't realised at the time that this myth pervades forever and ever, is that insects don't just do this with their wings. For a start, they do their wings in what we call a figure of 8 motion. So here is a fly looking from the side. We're looking at the start, the high point of the wing beat, then it's coming down here, flipping around over, then back, rolling back this way. So it's a continual figure of 8 movement, okay? So it's not a straight up and down movement. Then when you couple with that the flexing of the wing and the other components that reduce drag over the wings, then you end up with the ability to fly despite the size of the wing and the weight of the insect that might be involved as per the bumblebee mythology. Okay, so let's have a look at these. So here is a dragonfly. You can see its wings aren't going up and down, it's moving those in a figure of 8. But what I want to show you that is from, I've got some sort of animations here. This is the leading edge of a wing for hovering dragonfly. And you can see 2 vortices there. And it says here that the clockwise one is in blue and the anti-clockwise one is red. And it's the relative difference of those two things relative to the air pressure that you get over there, that gives you the lift. So certainly the way that they're moving provides plenty of lift with the way that the air moves over the wings. Once we have realised the design, there's quite a lot of work being done on producing micro air vehicles, so we're going down to very, very small drones. You don't see a lot of this in the literature. It's often funded by places like Defence, so it's not often there. There's a couple of images that I've seen of something that looks exactly like a mosquito or something else like this, but you get an appreciation of how small the size is. And there was a movie out probably 4 or 5 years ago now called Eye in the Sky, which had Helen Mirren in it, and they were looking at terrorist cells and using this little guy here, which was again a little micro air drone that had a little camera on it, and they'd bring it in as an insect and sit it on a limb and listen to and look at conversations. So I'm sure those things are around more than we realise, and a lot of the design and the principles have come from understanding more about insect flight. Okay, let's look at how we are going to power flight as an insect. And there are two different mechanisms, direct and indirect flight. Okay, direct flight is, an example here is the dragonfly, where we have two sets of muscles. One muscle pulls the wing down and another muscle lets the wing come upwards. So that muscle pulls down, that muscle pulls up, and there's an animation in the next one. So one contraction, one upstroke, another contraction, downstroke. With indirect flight, what they rely on is the compression or flexibility of the thorax of the insect. So they have muscles in different directions. They've got one going between the top and the bottom of the thorax, and another pair going between the front and the back of the thorax, just seen in cross section here. And that flexing allows a lot higher frequencies of wing beat than what other beats there. And the champions of all, I've said already, are flies, which would obviously use indirect flight. If you look at this here, and again there's some good videos that I've uploaded, if you're certainly interested in visual, to look at that, you can see here the pulling and pushing of the muscles producing direct flight, and here with the flexing of the thorax producing indirect flight and much higher frequencies possible. Okay, let's have a look at just a couple of examples of how insects coordinate their front and hind pair of wings. And it's very simplest. They've just got to make sure they don't interfere with each other. This is a green lacewing flying, so it's coordinating its wings independently, the front pair and the back pair, using that sort of figure 8, and you can see that could be quite a clumsy and not necessarily as fast a way to fly as you might be able to achieve through other methods. So insects have done a number of different things to improve that option for gaining more flight speed and more engine efficiency. One of those is that between the front and the hind pair of wings they've put a bunch of little hooks or hamuli along here, and these little hooks hook together the front and the hind pair of wings, such as in butterflies when they're flying, which means you're not having to coordinate two pairs, you've just got one much larger pair. And obviously butterflies aren't necessarily fast flyers, but they're good gliders and floaters and different things like that through powered flight. Beetles have done something slightly different. They only bother with one pair of wings for flight purposes. The other pair of wings has been hardened and made into an elytra or wing cover, which protects the wings. So here we can see two examples here. That elytra is put up, and then the flight wings, which unfolds underneath the elytra, is what they use for flying. So again, a slightly different approach. And the fastest of all have actually abandoned one pair of wings together. So these are flies. So as we saw in the lab, if you did look at the flies last week, they only have one pair of wings. So here we have a fly here, a crane fly with one pair of wings. The second pair of wings is reduced to a little haltier or like chicken drumstick like an appearance. A haltier here, you can see it here and here. And these actually act like a gyroscope, which then help with the yaw and the pitch as you're flying and moving and keeping you stable in flight. We get up to very high wing beat frequencies and very high speeds. Here is a hoverfly. Again, one pair of wings and the haltier acting to help it with flight. In this case here, I think in the previous one you had reasonably long antennae, you can shorten your antenna to much smaller so they're not interfering with you when you're flying. Okay, so that covers flight and mechanisms of flight and variation that we see among insects in flight. And I want to now move on to circulation. The blood, basically, the hemolymph, which is what's called in insects. So let's just take a look at the circulatory system for a human first. And here we have an example of that. So we have basically the circulatory system is linked to the respiratory system or the lungs, okay? So the lungs are taking in air, producing oxygen. That oxygen then is transported to the blood directly and pumped out through the aorta and the arteries to the extremities of the body, and deoxygenated blood goes back through the vein. Okay? So a circulatory system has a number of things that are quite clear, linked to carrying oxygen and also enclosed in veins and arteries. So I'll go to an easy comparison of those and then talk directly about the insect circulatory system. So an insect doesn't have it all enclosed in arteries and veins, it's largely open. So it's sloshing around in there. Secondly, it's not linked to the respiratory system, so it's not carrying oxygen, and it's not linked to any part of the respiratory system in the way that it travels through. So unlike us. Because it's not enclosed in veins and arteries and things, it's usually under fairly low pressure compared to the high pressure you can get through the elasticity of the walls of veins and arteries, aortas, etc., and hearts. You can get very well-regulated supply in a vertebrate. It's a bit slower, and not so well-regulated in an insect, and its return from going through the body back to the starting point as a consequence is also slower. So it's slower, it doesn't carry oxygen, it's open, it's not linked to the respiratory system, it's low pressure. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's all built for a purpose. So it works damn well. I mean, insects are hugely abundant. So it doesn't mean one's better than the other, and we'll talk about how it works for a purpose for insects. Here is a grasshopper that I think we might use more than once in some of the lectures to come. This Pete, and we're looking at the inside and the outside of the grasshopper. We've already done the outside of the grasshopper, so we know everything there. And we're starting to look inside, just to get a few ideas of some of the key processes, and that's the circulatory system. So here is the heart of an insect. It's a dorsal blood vessel, okay, right up the top here. One other lecture we'll be looking at the digestive system, which is in the middle, and another lecture will briefly mention the nervous system, which is down low here, the dorsal nerve cord, or ventral, sorry, nerve cord. So at the moment we're interested in this, the dorsal heart or aorta. Okay, let's cut that insect in half and have a quick look at how blood might circulate in an insect. The first thing is the blood, or the hemolymph, circulates from the posterior to the anterior. So it's coming in here and going out here. Coming in here, going out here. Coming in here, going out here. So this dorsal part of the circulatory system is known as a heart along here, and as an aorta when it gets closer to the head. But it has a number of valves in it. You can see here, these valves are called ostia. 1, 2, 3, 4, probably a valve per segment, or ostia per segment. And these are associated, if we look at this, I'll come back to this slide again, from the top with muscles that flex in and flex out. And they help open those ostia valves to let blood go into it and blood go out of it. So we've got blood coming in through these ostia, or hemolymph going in through this ostia, travelling up here, travelling along here, through the aorta, and then out through an open end to the dorsal heart there of the insect. So it's open, it's not closed. Once it comes through here, how does it get all the way back up here again? Well, there are a few little things that help along the way. One of those is that in most insects, the internal parts of the body are compartmentalised a little bit. So here we have the dorsal vessel or the heart, and we have a diaphragm below that, a dorsal diaphragm, so that helps keep some of the hemolymph in that area when it's moving around. This is the gut, and then we have, quite often, in most insects, not all, but most, we have a ventral diaphragm as well. So that it helps compartmentalise that movement and make it more likely that it's going to move through quicker rather than sloshing through a great big bag of nothing. The other thing that can help with moving the circulatory system around is when we've got to get out to things like the end of legs or the end of wings for circulation, then we need to have little supplementary parts, if you like, or pulsatile, they're called pulsatile. I don't know what it says pulsatile here, but it's pulsatile muscles. Not a great picture, but they actually are muscles that help move and pump that along a little bit further, and when it's going out to the extremities, such as the legs. Okay, so that's how it moves around. I don't think there's anything. Oh yeah, well, what can I say? There is a note that I think I should say on that. Okay, so the direction of flow, as I said, is generally from posterior to anterior, but they can actually completely change that direction of flow if they choose to. And there would be a couple of instances where they actually do shunt hemolymph around in different directions. And one of those is to get muscles active for flight, in particular, shivering, particularly in the evenings, if it's too cold. And the other is to move hormones around in the circulatory system. Now, hormones are very important. We'll talk about those in a minute, but they are, you know, the things that make the heart want to move, etc., and regulate all those sort of things. So the movement of hormones around can be in reverse direction if needed for that. So there are cases to do with that where the blood flow could be slightly different. Okay, let's have a look at the hemolymph itself. Okay, and most of these at the top are pretty much what we expect to find in our vertebrates system. So water, yes, a lot of water in there, a lot of organic molecules, carbohydrates, amino acids, peptides, protein. No surprise. Lipids and glycerol. The interesting thing with lipids, with insects, is they don't have a carbohydrate problem because they don't produce lipids, okay? Oh, sorry, they don't have a cholesterol problem because they don't produce lipids. They actually have to get that from their diet. They're not able to produce lipids. And there's also inorganic ions and minerals there, but the two that are most relevant to pointing out differences are the bottom two. No hemoglobin, that carries oxygen, okay? And hemocytes, which are involved with the immune or defence system of the insect. Alright, now as I said, there's always going to be exceptions, so I'm going to go straight to the exception when I said no hemoglobin. There are some small groupings of insects that do have hemoglobin in their blood, and one of those are the blood midges, the chironomid family in the flies, and here we can see them here. Now these live as larval stages in almost anaerobic conditions in the bottom of still water, bottom of, gorse troughs and things like that you might find in a paddock. And you can see here the colour of them is red because it's got hemoglobin, which enables them to get more oxygen out of those almost anaerobic conditions. So there are some insects that do have hemoglobin, but the 99.9% rule is they don't carry hemoglobin for oxygen. When you look at that colour there as well, I'll mention that in the next slide, I think. Let's have a look at the differences in the immune systems and the things that are important. Okay, so with vertebrates we have two defensive or immune systems. We have an innate system, which is there all the time and will fight off things that come in there, and we have an acquired immune system, which is the principle that you have of vaccination. You provide a little bit, and then your acquired immunity system builds up against that vaccination so that you are made immune from that disease. Insects don't have an acquired immune system, okay, to the best of our knowledge. Their system is innate, blood constitutes quite a lot of their weight, as it does in most things, 20 to 40% of their weight. Blood isn't always red. We don't have hemoglobin, so various colour pigments. You can get clear, you can get green, you can get shades of blue, all sorts of things of hemolymph in insects, and there below is a poor cockroach donating a little bit of blood down at the insect blood bank. Okay, so it transports nutrients, it transports waste, that's probably not surprising, but also hormones, which is relevant to what we want to talk about, and hemocytes, which are involved with the immune system in insects and important to the immune system. Up to 10% of the volume of blood is hemocytes. Okay, so that means I need to describe to you a little bit about what hemocytes are. Okay, they're a cellular response involved in healing wounds and immune reactions. Okay, so if you were to go puncture the side of an insect, immediately in the hemolymph, the hemocytes would come to that side of that puncture and try and block it up, if you like. So here we have a whole lot of hemocytes at a site of a wound, 17 hours after that wound was taken. And you can see that they're all coagulating around that particular point to try and heal, if you like, and block up the side of that wound. So definitely travel to a site. Now, in terms of immune reaction, getting rid of things that they don't want inside the body that have come in, diseases and other things like that, the hemocytes can do two different things, which are fairly similar. One, if it's small enough, like a small virus or something like that, they can actually eat. So they actually phagocytose or consume that invasive body. If it's too big, like maybe a parasitic wasp or egg or something that's come around, then the hemocytes will actually envelope that whole thing and surround it and reduce it of oxygen so that it actually dies. Okay, it can't actually get supplies. So they can either encapsulate it or eat it, the hemocyte. You want to get a little bit more tricky, and this is an area that is very active in research, which is the immune system of insects and the evolution of immunity systems in social insects in particular is of quite a lot of interest. So we have two types of immunity system now, a cellular one, which is involved with things like hemocytes, and a humoral, which is outside of the cell immune system. Okay, so the hemocytes here, all sorts of pictures of hemocytes, but I've already mentioned wound healing, encapsulation, and various forms of consuming things, be it melanisation, phagocytosis and modulation. They're all sort of the same sort of thing. We've also now discovered, as we're getting more and more molecular, we have quite a number of these antimicrobial peptides in the immune system, and they have different acronyms there. But these peptides do a number of different things: alter permeability membranes, change the signalling through nervous channels, mess with the cell wall synthesis, or can actually break, if you like, or lysis cell walls. So they are also involved in defence, and the more we're getting to learn about that, we also learn that these actually interact with this as well, and you have what's known as a phenyloxidase, which is involved with both the cellular and the humoral immune system. Now, phenyloxidase is interesting because it's when we are delivering an insecticide to an insect, the basic issue with an insecticide getting into an insect in terms of immune system is it's trying to race through with its system to try and break it down faster than it's being delivered to the insect. So phenyloxidase is an enzyme that helps break down the level of the insecticide when it's being delivered. So if we've got very high phenyloxidase activity, we may be able to get resistance in those species more than others. Okay, so it's a pseudo measure of used for understanding resistance in insects and a target site for understanding and overcoming resistance with that knowledge that we're now getting in the enzymes involved with defence. The other one that I mentioned that floats around there is hormones, and again hormones have a practical use too if you're an applied entomologist. So let's just have a look at two hormones that, and this is probably a fairly simplistic illustration with two hormones. One is a molting hormone. That molting hormone helps with going from instar to instar or nymph to nymph, as you're growing up, and the other is a juvenile hormone. So when you're an immature, you have both molting hormone and juvenile hormone. So this is getting much more funky and molecular, but I'm keeping it simple. So juvenile hormone here, once your juvenile hormone levels drop, then you can go through to a pupae, through to an adult, which only has molting hormone left in it. So it's a reduction in the level of juvenile hormone. So juvenile hormone then is sort of the elixir of youth. It's keeping you young, it's keeping you as a larvae. Okay? Once it drops, that's when you go through to holometabolous developers, through to pupation, or in any development through to adult. So these two are very important and key hormones. So we have actually learned through understanding of the hormone systems that we can mimic those, and these are known as insect growth regulators. We can provide artificial versions of these hormones, which then are used as controls for insects. So we've got insect growth regulators. We can have some that disrupt metamorphosis by being an analogue of a juvenile hormone. So they mimic the action of that juvenile hormone, they contain in there, so it forces the insect to remain immature, abnormally long, and to die, okay? Because it's still got juvenile hormone in it, so you can't really stay juvenile forever is the message of that. And we have a couple of these here that are commercially, methoprene or altitude, which is used to control mosquito larvae in ponds for vector control, and hydropene's another one, Gencor here. Quite a few of these we see used in things like dog and pet and cat collars, insect growth regulators, sometimes mixed with another chemical known as fipronil, but sometimes on their own for flea control as well. So you'll see those in your day-to-day existence if you have any of those animals. The other one is that we can not just mess with the juvenile hormone, we can actually mess with the molting hormones that are involved with the synthesis of chitin. We can do it in two ways. We can either inhibit the synthesis of chitin, remember with all those molting going on in the epidermal cells and activating the enzymes that break down the chitin, and this is difluorobenzene or dimlin, or a more newer class is that accelerates the onset of molting. So you've got too much that you can take away that the molting hormone to the point where it's accelerating it. A mimic is an example there. Mimic's used as quite in situations where you couldn't use something like a synthetic pyrethroid, for instance. In forestry here, mimic was registered for controlling a lot of lepidopteran or moth pests in forestry situations, because it doesn't have such a bad impact on streams and other things, but the flip side of that is it costs a hell of a lot more. So any commercial company is always going to want to spray the cheapest, not necessarily the most environmentally friendly. But definitely we have to use that information for control. Okay, the last bit then. We want to not only have our hemolymph running around, we want to actually get oxygen to our organs. So how do we do that if we're an insect? Okay, let's go back to us again. We know that now. We've got a lung. The lung actually takes in air, and then through the alveoli and all that stuff gets the oxygen through, deliver it to the heart, and then send it out to the aorta. So we've got lungs for doing that. Insects don't have lungs. Insects have something known as a tracheal system. T-R-A-C-H-E-A-L. Okay? So when you looked at an insect in week 1 lab, and I admit the morning lab was more chaotic than the afternoon. I think we got it better by the afternoon when everything was a bit more sorted. Hopefully you did manage to look at spiracles on the side of the abdomen. Here we can see spiracles. They're little holes. There's one pair of spiracles on either side with each abdominal segment. Here, so 8 in this case, and there's one associated with the mesothorax and one associated with the metathorax. So generally we have 10 pairs of spiracles. So these spiracles are little openings, and then backing onto those we have trachea, which are like vacuum cleaner hoses or plumbing or tubing going through the body. And the principle of this is that you can deliver air to any part of the body with oxygen in it. So this is our external opening here, or the spiracle opening. In comes the air, goes through the main trachea, then goes through tracheal branches, and then goes down tracheoles, which are tiny, tiny little ones, and they plumb straight into the muscle. So you can get oxygen very quickly to the muscle. The good thing about doing that is that diffusion of oxygen is up to 10,000 times faster in air than it is in fluid, so you can deliver your air quite quickly. Now, an insect has cuticle lining. These are all made of cuticle. We spoke about cuticle. So cuticle is what these are made of, and 5 to 50% of the body volume is trachea, depending on their energy needs. So the more trachea, the more energy needed for a system. As you saw when we looked at those testes, so at the bush cricket, we saw a lot of white tubes or trachea around there because that's fairly energy needed, but also around the flight muscles you would expect to see quite a lot of trachea. If we look at the trachea or the tracheoles, very small, they're actually made up of like very similar to a vacuum cleaner hose. So they're flexible by having these little winding sort of way of putting the cuticle down like a vacuum cleaner hose does. Okay, and in fact that is the slide that I didn't realise I had here. This is trachea here. You can see all over the testes of this bush cricket dissection. Yeah. So they're all trachea. Okay, let's have a look at this overall ground plan for a little bit more, about half a dozen more slides. I think I've got maybe 8 or 10 more slides to work with. So the basic, simple ground plan for the tracheal or respiratory system is 2 spiracles in the thorax, being in the meso and metathorax, and 8 spiracle holes along the abdomen, 1 per abdominal segment, except when we get down here where it's often more to do with genitalia. So that's your basic ground plan. Now, if we're going to be quite fast in flight and needing of more oxygen to be delivered, sometimes the tracheal become more like tracheal sacs, okay? So here we have a fly, and we've got quite large amounts of oxygen here and large amounts that can deliver oxygen up to the thoracic flight muscles. So they're not just necessarily narrow little tubes, they can be actually quite inflated, and obviously this thing needs quite high oxygen delivery for it. If we look at the shape of insects, there is an argument to say that insects couldn't be too fat this way. Because the tracheal system, you need to actually get a trachea that can deliver air to any point of the body. So it's better to be long and narrow than it is to be fat and short, if you like. So that way you can deliver from your outside to the inside fairly quickly, rather than having to travel a long way and lose a lot of supply in that process of going a long way through tubes. So I think that's a fairly reasonable argument to make. If insects here, as I said, that's already quite needing a lot of oxygen, but there is one other thing that you may have noticed if you've been chasing European wasps. Oops, hang on, I'm 1 slide behind myself here, more than 1 slide behind. This is a caterpillar, and you can see here all the spiracles on the outside up there, and then we're getting up towards the thorax, which is more hidden there, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 along the abdominal segments. This one I was also meaning to discuss, which is that a spiracle isn't just an opening that does nothing. It's actually a regulated opening, okay? So the insect has the ability to open or close it according to the nervous system, okay? If an insect is in a fairly dry environment, you would generally find something that's involved in a dry environment that the spiracles would be recessed in further, and possibly even with small amounts of hair to stop airflow over it as well, so that you're not losing so much oxygen. Because the problem that an insect has is it's got to open these things up, but in the process of opening it up you're getting oxygen in but you're losing water. Okay? In a dry environment that can be very desiccating for you. You've also got to get carbon dioxide out. So it's a process of regulating the opening and closing of your various spiracles. So it controls and regulates the opening to minimise water loss. Oxygen in, CO2 out. Okay. So in that process they can move air from, generally from one direction, from anterior to posterior is the flow of air. but they can change that according to how they open their valves. So they can spend their valves closed for a very long time, but at some point they've got to get the CO2 out. Okay, so if it's in a very dry environment, they can shut it down for quite a period of time. Okay, going to where I was thinking I was going, was saying that we do have quite energy needs, and if you looked at European wasps, sometimes, and other wasps, even bees a little bit, sometimes when they land, particularly on some of these horrible hot days we've had of 39 plus, you'll see their abdomen is telescoping in and out when they land, and that is actually to try and push air through the anterior spiracles and carbon dioxide out through the posterior spiracles, so directing the flow to try and get that out by telescoping their abdomen as well. So that helps with pushing air very quickly for the needs they might have, particularly on conditions that are stressful. Okay, now we get into the last few, which is aquatic insects. I said we've got to do something slightly different. If you're diving down in water, then how do you arrange your spiracles so that you're not getting filled up with water and you're actually getting oxygen? Well, here is one simple approach. This is a mosquito larvae here. You can see you actually have no spiracle openings anywhere along the body except one. So they've all been plumbed to one particular opening on a siphon or a tube. So if we look at this lovely electron microscope of this mosquito larvae, you can see its wonderful filtering mouth parts there. Here is where all the spiracles are contained in this siphon here. There's no spiracles along any one of the body surface here, and that reaches the water layer there through which they puncture through and get air. Another option concerns some of the diving beetles, and they have two ways of taking air down. They're not necessarily all the time underwater, they're at the surface of the water regularly as well. What they do is either two. They can actually take a gas bubble across their whole body down with it. So here we have an example of a water scavenger beetle, and it's got water repelling hairs across the whole of its body. So as it dives, it gets virtually covered in a complete bubble of air, and then its spiracles and things can function quite well, taking that air through there. The other option that some of the diving predaceous beetles do is they actually concentrate an air bubble to a particular region. So in this case here, they get the air underneath the elytra, which then becomes a bubble down here, and your spiracles will be concentrated more down this end here, or only open down that end to take the oxygen. So you're diving down with a bubble over your whole body or a part of your body to go down. The last few options here involve living completely in environments that are going to be hard to get water, either underwater or inside something else like a parasitic wasp larvae. So in this case here, this is a parasitic wasp larvae which lives inside, say, a caterpillar. It doesn't have any spiracles, it just gets air through exchange with the host itself, okay? No need for a lot of air there. And these two here, one of these is aquatic nymphal stages, naiads, and these have gills, if you like, mayfly nymphs here. There's an example here, and you can see here. So if we have a look at it here, this is a larvae of a stonefly here. I think it's a stonefly larvae, or mayflies and stoneflies, but the actual trachea is put out on plates out here, with increasing the surface area so that they can get oxygen to transfuse itself through into the insect, so maximising the surface area where you can get gas exchange. Or in the case of these, which is a stonefly, they have a similar sort of gill, but it's like almost like a dandelion tuft, again with large surface areas for getting oxygen to transfer through into it for exchange. The last example of what a one way that insects do it, and these are predatory dragonfly nymphs, so they are fairly fast moving, need a reasonable amount of oxygen, not just crawling around the bottom feeding on filter stuff. They actually use their anus in a trick that would be interesting if you could do that in a bath, where they actually push water into their anus and out again very fast. And in the process of doing that, then you're getting oxygen through these tracheal branches that exist in their rectum and their anus. So a very interesting way, if you like, of getting oxygen quickly to yourself if you're aquatic. And that, I believe, finishes. As I said, I reckon it was going to be earlier, a little bit earlier.